Hello, everyone, and welcome to DJ Tutorials. This is part two of a series on basic geometric compositions, and this series is for beginners, intermediates, and even advanced who want to just relearn some of the basics. So let's just jump into the second part. So here we are. We're inside of where we left off last time, and if you are not at this point, please go back and take a look at part one. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to start setting up the general composition here and moving our objects into position. I'm going to be showing you how to move the camera, and I'm going to be showing you some composition examples and how to take a look at composition guides within your camera. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's go ahead. Oh, by the way, everybody, over here on the left, this is all of the commands I'm doing, all of the my screencast keys here. So you'll be able to see what I'm doing, and then down here on the bottom, this is where if you are not sure what's going on, the what I'm doing will actually light up. You can see that that's middle mouse, left click, right click, and various other commands on the keyboard there. So here we go. So the first thing that we want to do is we actually need to know what we're doing with our scene. What do we want to do to make this look good? And really the best way to do this, especially for a beginner, is to look at what some other people have done. And in order to do that, there's multiple ways you can do this, but let's do this the easiest way possible. We're just going to open up our browser and we're going to take a look here. We're going to do a search, basic geometric compositions, images. And if we take a look at just the images here, you can see that there are some examples that are readily available for you to click on and take a look at. And I'm not going to say that this is the best thing to do for everybody, that you just copy what other people do, but it really is helpful to look at successful pieces. Um, so let's take a look at something here. So like this one right here. So if we right click, open link, another tab, you can see that this is from Shutterstock. So they're actually selling this. This is something you can make by the end of this tutorial series. And not that this exact one, because obviously you don't want to copy what someone else does and sell it. That's not right. But I mean, look at you have this one here. You have this one here. This person is doing basic geometric compositions and selling these as art pieces on stock imagery sites. So take a look at something that may be successful, and you kind of want to follow those guidelines, or at least try to do something like that to start with, and then make your own compositions as you feel comfortable. And what we're going to do now, and I'll talk about doing this towards the end, but I'm going to show you how to help you create these kinds of compositions. So if we go back into Blender here, and what we want to do is we want to start actually moving our camera. And just a disclaimer, should you always do this in workflow where you're setting up the composition before you do your texturing and your lighting and everything else? That's arguable, but since so many people who start doing Blender, they want to do faces and characters and all this other stuff, and then when they get to rendering it, they really don't know how to compose their shot. They don't know how to make it look nice. So the point of doing this is to help you make a more interesting composition. Okay, so that you are thinking about that at the beginning instead of at the end when you're trying to figure out what to do with all this stuff you've done. Um, so let's go ahead and start to move this camera. So make sure that let's actually move this backdrop into a new collection here. And I'm actually going to save this, save as, and this is going to be step 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this into a new collection. So select your backdrop or your background if you haven't done this yet. Hit M, new collection, and we're going to call this backdrop. Okay. While we're at it, we're also going to change the naming of our objects here. Now you can do this up here by double clicking. Actually, this is already named this, so you can call it whatever you want. You can call this Bob if you want. But I guess this is fine as cylinder since that's what it is. Actually, that should be cylinder. And you can also change it here. If you click on this object properties, you can change it right here if you wanted to. So let's work on moving our camera. So select your camera, and what you could do is you could hit R and, oh, let's go up here, change this to individual origins. So what you want to do here is you'll want to select on your camera, and you can hit R to rotate and all that. But I'll show you what happens if you do that. If we split the panel by left clicking this top section here and dragging over, and then in this panel, hover over here and hit 0 to show the camera view, and make sure that you hold shift and move around. If you just middle mouse click, you'll pop out of the camera. So let's hit 0, and we're in here. And you can zoom out and stuff like that over here. And if we take this and we rotate it, you'll see that it goes all wonky and crazy. And we really don't want that. And just to make this simple for you guys, all I'm going to do, and I'm going to left click and drag this over, is I'm going to open up this view panel. If you don't see that, hit N, click on view, and go right here where it says lock camera to view, and you'll left click on that. And now when we move around the camera here or move around this view, we're actually now moving the camera the same way that we do in our viewport. Now, one disclaimer that I'll tell you, or a caveat to this, I'm going to close this panel here by left clicking and dragging over to the right. And let's say that you're at this point and you wanted to see that other panel here. If you left click and drag up here and you make a new panel, and then I start moving around, look, I'm moving the camera. Because when you duplicate your panels by splitting them, it actually duplicates this right here, the lock camera to view in here. So make sure that if you split your panel after you've done that, that you deselect that lock camera to view so you don't screw up your view that you were doing. Now, obviously, our objects are not set in the place where we want them for our composition, but let's just move our camera to a much better sort of situation so that when we start setting up our composition, the camera is not so far away. So in this panel, make sure that you have underneath view the lock camera to view selected, and go ahead and just move and zoom around and try and get your camera to be a little bit more sort of like, centered in on your objects. And once you have a decent position here, let's say it's like more ground level, or you can do something more like this, whatever it is, the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to change our composition shape. And this is another area that people forget and they just don't think about. The way that Blender sort of sets up your default is it has a 1920 by 1080 or HD composition. And if you go over here to the output properties, you'll see that the resolution is 1920 pixels by 1080. And what that means is this is basically for movies. That's widescreen, and it's, the HD format. We're not really interested in that. We want to make something that looks more of like a fine art piece that you can put in an actual like ready-made frame or something like that. And that could be a square composition, which would mean that the resolution of 1920 for the X, the bottom would need to be the same. So if you or left click down here and type in 1920, that would be a square composition. And let's see if we can find one on here. Here we go. Here's a square composition right here. See that? So they did a square composition for this one. And you can see a bunch of these do use a sort of, some of these use a square composition like this one here, but this one uses a different one. So this is a different composition here. And this one right here looks like they use the HD format of 1920 by 1080, and apparently they're selling that. No offense to the artist, but I think this could be handled a little bit better. And here you have another one here that has a different sort of setup here that they're selling on Dreamstime. So in order for us to sort of figure out what kind of composition we're going to use, one thing I would recommend for beginners especially, and if you want to print these out and frame them or have them printed professionally or be able to sell them as professionally printed pieces, it's good to know what the standard picture frame ratios really are, so that people, can that so that you can render it out and people can crop it or, move it into these sort of frames. So if we take a look at this, so here's sizes for picture frames in fine art, and we look at this, so 4 by 6, 4 by 7, 4 by 12, all this sort of stuff here. It says right here most popular as of December, 8th, 2014. This really hasn't changed that much. Okay, so this is still pretty relevant. But you can take a look at some different charts here and just take a look at how they've done these compositions, or what size picture frames are really popular, and that'll give you some idea about, what you should sort of look at doing for a piece of fine art. And whether you do it a horizontal like this or you do it vertical, let's see here. So let's open up. Well, let's just, this is fine. Just you'll have to use your imagination. So if some of these that look like they're vertical were, laid sideways or, whatever, um, you just have to sort of think about that when you're creating your piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 15 by 20. Now you can do a square if you'd like, or you could do a horizontal, or you could do a vertical, but just for the purposes of showing you how to set up your composition ratio, I'm going to uh, explain this to you. So let's say you want to do a 15 by 20, which is a standard ratio. So generally that would be 15 inches by 20 inches. But over here, if we go to our output properties to change our ratios, you can see that it's 1920 pixels by 1920 pixels. And if I change this to 15 pixels by 20 pixels, it may look like it's fine here, but when you go to render, it's only 15 pixels by 20 pixels, which is really tiny. You don't want that. You need a bigger number here. So the ratio of 15 by 20 is what we're at, what we're going after here, not the pixels. That's sort of arbitrary. Okay, the pixels will determine the actual quality of your render. How many pixels are in the scene, the more higher quality it will be at the end. So what we want is we want to multiply these values by something to give us a good high definition image here. So if I click on the top one and then right or left click the end of the 15 here and hit times or star on your numpad, 10, it gives us 150. And then if I do the same thing down here, times 10, it gives us 200. Now that's not exactly right because still it's only 150 pixels by 200, which is really small. What we want to do is we actually want 1500 pixels by 2000 pixels, and that will give us an actual better resolution for our image in the final. And what we'll do is we'll actually set this up to be more of let's do horizontal. So right now it's set up to be vertical, and we can move these objects around to make a vertical composition. But if you wanted to do a horizontal, you would just change the top one to 2000 pixels by 1500 pixels, and there you have a horizontal composition. The next thing that I want to talk about is your actual composition guides to help you place objects into the scene. And there's really two methods that I think will really help out beginners, and that's understanding golden ratio and thirds. So you don't know what I'm talking about most likely because a lot of you are probably beginners, and that's fine. I might do a separate set of videos on understanding composition, guides, as far as like, what all that stuff means. But just so that you get a sort of like your feet wet here, if you just do a search and we go, let's just do a thirds composition guidelines, you can see there's all kinds of stuff here. And really, it's about having these lines that dictate where certain points of interest can kind of be placed. And you can see here, this surfboard guy, he's right there splitting that these two third areas here. And then the rest of it is sort of what's called negative space. You can see in this photo right here, it's on the right third, it's a road with a vanishing point back over there, and then 2/3 of the image is filled up with this stuff here. And here, which they don't actually have the guidelines here, but you can see that the mountain, I think that's Morro Bay, um, it's split right here. And that is splitting the third on the left, and then the rest of this is the 2/3 on the right for negative space, just to give some interest to it. And you can kind of look at this all day. Now, here's what's the weird thing here. I put thirds composition guides, and this showed up. You see this, like, nautilus shape here. This is what's referred to as generally like golden mean or Fibonacci sequence ratios and stuff like that. And what it has to do with is a set of ratios that happen in regular natural life. And like if you do a search here, I know I don't want this to be too technical, but if you do Fibonacci sequence in flowers, for example, um, there's actually a number, a Fibonacci sequence that you can look up, and you'll notice that it kind of like that pattern is sort of done in real life. And if we do, like, look right here, you see this right here? Does that look familiar? Let's try and make this bigger. Does that look familiar to you guys? See that? It's that nautilus shape. So the Fibonacci sequence is really like a big deal, and a lot of people have been studying this for a long time with how nature deals with this sort of stuff. It's really bizarre, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole to really look at that, but it's worth you checking it out. But what we're really into right here is what's called golden ratio. So if we go to golden ratio composition, you can see that basically what it says is here on the left side is a big square. So that section right there, you can have something or have what's called negative space. And then here you can have another point of interest. And then as it goes in, you can kind of circle in on points of interest. And you can track this. There's a lot of work that's done with stuff like this. So you can see like the curving of the view of your view for this. You're starting here and you're going here, and then it's coming down over here. So you're kind of like following this in the composition there. And you see right here, it's called Fibonacci spiral. So, for like right here, sorry, let's just open this up because this is really, really cool stuff. You can see that it starts over here, comes around, and then this person is sort of set in this area. So really, really fun to take a look at and, figure this sort of stuff out. Now, how does this relate to our scene? So here we are inside of our scene again. And what we want to do is we want to select the camera, and you can do this up here in the node tree, or you can select the box here, the, oops, now, uh, really quick view, turn off lock camera to make sure you don't screw up your composition. If I go over here and I select it from the viewport with left click, or you can left click and drag for the box select, or you go over here to your node tree, you can left click on that camera. What we're going to do is we're going to go here to camera or object data properties, which is a little camera icon here. And then we're going to go to the drop down here, nope, viewport display. Click here, and then there's another thing down here. Click that down, and you'll see that there is center, center diagonal, thirds, golden ratio, blah, 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 blah. So turn on golden ratio, and this is what it is showing. Here on the left, if you can see this dotted line, let me try and make this bigger here so you can see it. Here on the left, you see the big box. So here's the line here, the big box. The shape would go through here and then sort of like wrap around, okay? So you have to kind of use your imagination a little bit, but what we're really going to use is the thirds one here, just because. We're just going to use that. And what I want you to kind of play with is just taking these objects, and you can, what I think works the best is having over here your composition, and then moving your objects over here. If you hit G, and then Shift Z, you can just move it along the Y and Z axes, or sorry, the Y and X axes, and not the Z. So Shift Z will do everything but whatever one you press. And you can move this over to, like, say, here. So we're going to have this cut the third section right here. And let's grab the ball here, and then we'll move that. I'm going to hit Shift Z again, grab with G, Shift Z, move it to about here, and hit G and then Z, move it up, scale it down a little bit. And what I want is for it to actually be right in this sort of crosshair. So if I go over here, hover over here, hit G, move it there, scale, and then just make sure that it's set. we'll go to front view here, G and then Z to move it down. We can sort of set that there. And then this one here, maybe we put this over here. You know what? Yeah, let's do this. So scale it up. I'm going to hit Shift Z because I just wanted to scale. Oops, sorry. I'm going to hit S and then Z because I just wanted to scale up on Z. Grab it. Let's move it maybe here. Scale it down a little bit on Z. Grab Z. Move it down. And maybe set it there so that it's cutting this. Or maybe I just want to move everything over to be on this side. To be on this side of the composition. Or you can place this way in the back. I'm going to hit 7 and move this back here. You can kind of play around with using these guides to sort of set your objects. You can set them inside of the third section. You can set them where it's intersecting. Just try and play around with these compositional guides and find something that's interesting to you. And this is the part where I tell people this constantly. If you can't make 3 or 4 geometric objects look good in a composition, how do you expect to make a face or a person or a character or a full scene look good if you can't even do this? So this is a challenge, and it's worth it to just play around and see if you can come up with something. Now, if you don't want to use the thirds and you want to try something else, so if I select the camera over here, go to camera, make sure that the composition guides is clicked here. You can change it to golden ratio. Make sure that you deselect the thirds because you'll start like layering these up. Click on the golden ratio and then you can use that instead. There's also other things like golden triangle and things like that, which you can use as guides, and you can look up how that can be used in your scene if you wish. You can see that here it's, there's something kind of to this as far as those compositional guides are concerned. Harmonious triangles, all that kind of stuff. Feel free to look that up if you wish, but just for the purposes of this, use the thirds or the golden ratio and just sort of play around and see if you can come up with an interesting looking composition just using those guides. Now, the challenge that I'm going to give you is to go online and find 3D geometric object compositions, kind of like what we looked at before if you spell it right, and find something that you really like. So you can click on any of these and then look down the list and see if there's something that you really like with basic geometric objects. And so here's one even right here, sphere, uh, cylinder, and cube. Um, and see if you want to try to use that as a guide and then recreate it, or something like that. Come up with or find something that you really like and try to match that, or use it as a sort of like starting point for you to create your geometric composition. This one right here, it looks like they just used a cube on the bottom. They made this pyramid shape here, and then they have the sphere over here. So, and check it out, right? So if we look at the rule of thirds, right? Third, third, the floor plane looks like goes off into the distance here on this lower third area, and it's sort of at the same point that this cut is done. And then if you go third, third, they're sort of like using that as a guide point, it looks like, for this guy right here. So, and then if you look right here, this upper third area is blank, and everything is sort of housed in this kind of like a square-ish section down here. So again, take a look, look around. I actually used this one here as a reference point for a render that I'll pop up on the screen now. And I created these objects to sort of like mimic this one. Now, a little bit of a bonus that I'm going to throw at you here. I am going to show you how to create a cone. So, uh, what you guys probably did was you may have already started trying to do this, and it may be an issue for you when you're creating your geometric object where it looks weird. And I'll explain why that is. So let me go ahead and turn off my background and my objects. And I'm actually going to turn off this scene collection here. And I'm going to close this panel. So if we start at the center here, hit Shift A, add cone. You're like, let me hit period to zoom in on this. You're thinking, great, this is done. All I gotta do is hit shade smooth and I'm done. Well, if you hit shade smooth and you actually look at your object and we go up here, that's a problem. Basically, the top of this point is smoothed. See that? Smooth. And the bottom has the same effect, or the same thing that we were kind of seeing on the cylinder from earlier, where this is not really a sharp angle change. It's just more like rounded as far as the shading is concerned. And when you go to do your final, this is going to be a problem. You're going to have issues here and you're not going to be happy with your final composition. Okay, I'm just going to tell you. So we actually don't want to use this to create our cone. So I'm going to hit X to delete that. And you can think about this and try this challenge out to see if you can come up with a way to make a better cone. But, and I'll give you a moment, pause the video. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to actually do this. So what we want to do is actually have a cylinder. So if I hit Shift A and I add a cylinder, here is the cylinder that we had before. But really, what we want is a cone which has a smaller top and a larger base, right? So all you have to do is hit Tab. Let's go to the vertex select up here. Alt, left click here for this top loop. Hit S to scale down. And let's put it at about there. And now we have our cone. Now, why did I make this flat and not pointed? Well, if I take the cone out, I just added that cone before, and you take a look at this, this is the same issue that I was talking about with a UV sphere. This top point is going to cause issues not only with a UV unwrap or a material that you've wrapped onto it, but it is changing. It's not using a quad base system. And because it's not quad base and it's going to a point, it causes the issues that I was showing you here. So if we take this and we right click shade smooth, you can see there's still issues with this. So how do we resolve this issue? So we kind of do what we did before with our modifiers. What we're going to do is we're going to go here, modifier properties. We're going to add an edge split, which will split the bottom and make that nice angle change so it's no longer rounded. Let's also add a subdivision, hit Control 2. So now it's smoother. And we're going to add a bevel and move the bevel, hit this up arrow, move it above the subdivision and above the edge split. So it hasn't really done anything yet, and that's because, or it's done something, but not what we want. It's beveling every single edge, so we have to control where the actual bevel is taking place on our modifier. So hit Tab to go into edit mode, go to edge select up here, hold Alt, left click the bottom, and let's just see what happens. No, let's actually do the top because we do want the top to be beveled. So zoom in at the top, Alt, Shift, left click for the top as well. Go up here to Item. If this is an open, hit N. And then right down here, mean bevel weight, left click, drag up. Don't do it on vertices data. That's not what we want right here. And now you can see that there's a blue line here at the top. And if we look at the bottom, there's a blue line down there. Go to bevel in your modifiers panel, or the modifiers. Go down here to limit method and click on weight. And now you can see that we have a angle change down here and an angle change up here, and we can control that with this offset. Now, one thing to note about using this method is, and any method where you use the bevel, is that this top section right here, if this can't be beveled anymore, it's actually going to control how the bottom limitation is. And it will only be beveled as far as, if I drag to the right, you'll see that even if I'm going up more and more and more, there's no other beveling happening. It's just staying there. So there's 0, left click, hold shift, drag, and you can see that it goes to just this point right here and it won't go any further. That's because this top one can't be beveled anymore. There's ways to do some other stuff with it to make that not such an issue, but this is what this is this is what it is. And I'm not going to tell you anything else other than, you know, this is what is happening. Okay? And we don't want this to be really a point here. We want it to be more rounded. So under segments, we're going to increase this to, let's do a 3. And there you have a rounded point. And at the bottom, you have a rounded area here. So that's a more realistic cone than the other one. Now, if this still feels too rounded to you, you can hit Shift, hold Alt, and left click this top loop, and you can scale that in. But like I said before, your bevel will be limited based on the top, so the bottom bevel will be reduced if you do that. So just keep that in mind as you're doing that. But this should work just fine for the purposes of this tutorial series or whatever you're trying to do. This should work completely fine. There will be an issue that I will point out to you about how this renders out the UV unwraps and stuff like that, and how it's actually mapping to these surfaces, but we will cover that in a later tutorial part. So thanks again, folks, and we will see you next time when we start to finalize our composition, and in the future parts when we start to add lighting and materials to these objects. I think you're going to be really pleasantly surprised with the final outcome. So take the time to make your composition look really nice, just like this, without adding any materials or lighting, and then go ahead and continue on the next part. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and make sure that you hit the little bell icon to notify you when new videos are uploaded. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.